Before we get to today's stories, I would like to say a disclaimer. The stories presented in this video delve into themes that might be unsettling for some viewers, including graphic descriptions and eerie scenarios. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. These tales aren't for the faint of heart. If my chilling content sends shivers down your spine and leaves you craving more, please subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world to me. Obsessed neighbor. This happened in 2020, Jan 2022, over the course of the time I lived in this apartment. I, 21 female at the time, and my husband, but then boyfriend, 22 male at the time, and I moved into our downstairs apartment. We loved it. It was our first place that wasn't a dorm, and we didn't have roommates. When we first moved in, we only had one cat, but over time we ended up with 2 cats and a dog. The way this apartment was set up was duplex style, so each building only had 4 apartments, 2 on the bottom and 2 on the top. We have the bottom right apartment, and behind us was a cemetery. We would always joke that at least our neighbors are quiet. Well, we were wrong. The first time our upstairs neighbor had an issue, he stood outside of his apartment and slammed his door open and closed for 10 minutes. We could not figure out what we did wrong. Did we close a door too loudly? He wouldn't communicate with us over what the issue was, but any time we did something wrong, in his mind, he would slam his door open and closed for 10 minutes, shaking our whole apartment. The night before I was flying out for our wedding, we spent the whole day at work, and then we went to a diner for a late-night meal, just trying to have a nice night as our last night together as fiancés. We come home and I'm having an anxiety attack about if I packed everything. My fiancé is at the passenger side door trying to talk to me through my anxiety attack when our neighbor comes flying down the stairs yelling at us. Something about how we made noise all day and he could not believe that we are so inconsiderate of him. My fiancé yells at him to F off as he's trying to protect me. Once we get inside, my fiancé goes upstairs to talk to him. We figure out it's the cat tree, and every time our cat jumps on it, it hits the wall. Okay, easy enough, we move the cat tree from the wall. Or so we think. We return from our honeymoon and we think everything is good. My husband tries to befriend the neighbor as they both play online games. And my husband asks if instead of slamming the door, could he message us on Discord when he has an issue. He agrees, but that doesn't happen. I decide to call the apartment complex to let them know what happened, and they are understanding and say, okay, let's reach out to the property managers, who are the other upstairs apartment. The husband of the property manager team basically tells us we are making everything up because he would know if his neighbor was slamming the door for 10 minutes straight and to stop making waves. It's now the end of 2021, and I have spent my time in this apartment in fear every single day. Rent was dirt cheap, like $600 for a 1-bedroom, so we were going to tough it out. My husband gets told that he got a promotion and we are moving to the East Coast. We are so excited, so he leaves, and I finish packing up the apartment. I try to be the perfect neighbor now that my husband is gone. I use my earphones for everything and anything. I close stuff very slowly. I do not want to make waves. It's now a week before I start the drive across country. My friend and people from my husband's work are helping load up our U-Haul box for the day. After that, my friend and I decided to go into town for the rest of the day since my apartment is empty besides a bed on the ground. I drop her off at her house and then get home at 6 p.m. I decide to put in my earphones and vacuum. After I vacuum, I take out the trash and lock the front door as I was going to lay down and watch TikToks. My husband was always on my case because I would often forget to lock the front door. I lay down with my earphones in and watch TikToks for maybe 20 minutes when I hear someone at my front door pounding on it. I know that voice. It's my upstairs neighbor. My dog is trying to crawl into my skin. Meanwhile, my male cat is at the window hissing at him. He is pounding on my windows now and yelling that he's gonna K me. I call my mom, who is 4 states away. She tells me to call 911 and not her. I'm texting my husband and another friend. I'm whispering to 911 that my upstairs neighbor is at my door, threatening me. I then hear him trying to open up my front door. Since it's a small town, the cops are there very quickly. They take him away, and I'm left in my living room with 2 cops. I can't speak. I just keep asking if he's gone. They assure me he's going to jail for the night. My friend, who lived an hour away, had loaded up her husband in the car and drove to my apartment to get me. I spent the night at my friend's house that night. My mom arrived the next day, and I called the apartment complex again to tell them what happened. They finally believed me. Well, they had no choice. I sent them the police report. My mom and I start the drive to the East Coast early, as I wanted to close that chapter, and I wasn't sleeping with the nightmares. We are in the middle of the Midwest when someone from the hospital he was committed at calls me to tell me they released him. But I needed to call the cops for an order of protection because he was still threatening my life. I said I was halfway across the country, so he can't get me now. They said that was for the best, given his hatred towards me. We never found out what was the final straw, if it was me vacuuming at 6 p.m. But I never not lock the front door now. I couldn't be left alone for months. I was constantly checking to see if he had found where we moved to. In 2023, we came to a plea agreement, since he moved home to his parents in Alaska, that if he got mental health help, that I would drop the charges. We now have a pit bull who is being trained to guard me at night so I can sleep. And I always lock the front door when I enter my apartment. I grew up in a rough neighborhood. Rough neighborhoods are kind of funny, based on what I've heard from other people with similar experiences, in that you tend to have a really polarizing effect. You have your ghost neighbors, people that never talk to anyone, and for all intents and purposes, don't exist. You have your neighbors from hell, and you have your awesome neighbors that you keep as close to you as possible, because in that kind of setting, you need to. The neighbor on either side of the house I grew up in was pretty good. On the right was a ghost neighbor who eventually started talking to us and being pretty cool, and on the left were my godparents. Across the street was a family of meth addicts. 2 doors down from them on the corner was a guy who cooked and sold meth. He had a network of users and sellers all down the street, and damn near one corner house at every intersection was involved with him. This guy was a fucking icon. People in the area called him a number of things. Tweaker Dan was one nickname. The White Guy was another. He had a makeshift auto shop in his garage, and he worked on cars from around 5 a.m. until about midnight every day, loudly, punctuated by people coming and going from his house to buy meth or shoot the shit or whatever. Sometimes he would have loud arguments with people outside, and sometimes he would have gunfights with people he argued with. More often, when he went for his gun, people left. Dan rode his bike everywhere. He had a car, and it worked, but he generally just rode his bike all over the place. Now, growing up, I just saw him as a shitty neighbor to be feared and avoided. The thing was, Tweaker Dan was actually a pretty friendly guy. He would wave to everyone, neighbors, anyone who lived in the neighborhood, anyone he recognized, really. It wasn't until I was older that I learned a little more about Dan and his operation, because of some mutual friends I ended up knowing. Dan didn't just supply meth to the neighborhood users and sellers. Dan controlled a large amount of the local supply chain. There were 2 major gangs in the area, but our neighborhood fell directly in a kind of neutral area between their territories. One gang probably could have taken our neighborhood if they had wanted to. They were big enough and powerful enough, but for Dan was their supplier. They knew him as the White Guy, and part of their arrangement with him is that he sold to them, but they stayed the fuck out of the neighborhood. This was his arrangement with anyone affiliated that he sold to. He would sell to pretty much anyone, but if he dealt with you, you kept your shit out of his neighborhood. Don't shit where you live, sort of thing. This is also why he rode his bike everywhere and waved to everyone. Dan was keeping an eye on who came and went. He waved because he wanted you to know he was watching. It wasn't so much that he was being friendly, though he was, but that he was communicating something very important. He was watching. To those of us that weren't involved with him, we didn't know. We didn't know about his rules, who he said was allowed to come and go, the arrangements he'd made that basically kept our neighborhood from getting worse as the city around us turned to shit. We only knew about his erratic and peculiar behavior, that he never slept, that he dealt drugs, that he did them. A lot of the clean houses in the neighborhood vilified him, but it was always peculiar to see which houses were friendly with him, because it was not always who you'd expect. For a guy who had so much interaction with the meth heads, he was also friends with the prison guard, the family who lived a few doors down, my godfather, people you'd have thought would have avoided him. But they knew. Fuck knows how, but they did. I asked my godfather about it after I found out, and he said yeah, he knew. He just didn't see it as something that should be talked about. So that's Tweaker Dan. One of the best and worst neighbors I've ever had. My parents just happened to have the most unsettling neighbor ever. Nothing vulgar or disgusting, just strange, and eventually it became borderline stalker-ish. It started when he moved in and bought my siblings and I toys. Lots of toys. Candy too. And he'd come over and hang around our front yard and talk to my little siblings. However, he barely spoke English and my little siblings barely understood him. Plus he was really creepy looking. Full beard, ratty clothes, giant glasses where you could barely see his face, and thus didn't really talk to him much, which made him angry. He would yell at my siblings when they would avoid him. Then there was the 3 a.m. lawn mowing and gardening. Often, I'd get home late with friends, and he'd be watering the lawn in the middle of the night. Then he started building elaborate fountains and brick structures around his yard. He even made a huge PVC pipe Christmas ornament and left it up in his yard until May. My mother would joke that he was building a spaceship to go home, and we'd laugh about it until he actually made a PVC UFO in his yard. Then we'd joke about how he would always be listening to us and must have installed listening devices in our house. But it was always followed with nervous laughter. However, the creepiest part about him is when we'd catch him looking into our yard and watching my younger siblings in the pool with their friends. So my father put up a solid 8-foot-high fence with no gaps in it. It took about 3 weeks for him to get a periscope-type device to look over my fence. I wouldn't have believed it if my mother hadn't got a picture of it. She's an amateur photographer and was taking pictures of the kids in the pool. Add that all up, with him gossiping to neighbors and friends that my parents were getting divorced and I was dropping out of school, and we're pretty sure we win the creepiest neighbor award in our town. My mother actually got really angry about the gossip thing and told him to never interact with my family again. What concerns me is that his poor wife never seems to be in the house the same time as him. Sometimes, she sleeps in her car, then goes inside when he comes out for a little night gardening. It's a shame, she's a really nice woman. She let me use her Wi-Fi when I was younger. Psycho moves in next door to my grandmother's house in 1975. Tears down existing fence between property and rebuilds it 3 feet into her property. Grandma politely and meekly asks him to move it back. Neighbor tells 85-year-old grandma to fuck off, literally, and lays a string of other curse words on her, telling her the property is now his. Dad goes to grandmother's, asks neighbor to move fence. Neighbor tells dad to fuck off. Dad was smart and a man you did not fuck with. Dad hires surveyor to confirm property lines. Confirmed. Dad hires contractor to tear down fence. Neighbor calls police. Police come. Dad, grinning evil grin at neighbor, shows police the survey. Police tell neighbor to fuck off, not literally, or go to jail. Dad sues neighbor for cost of survey, fence removal, and travel expenses. He lived 300 miles from grandmother. Dad wins. Fast forward 15 years, 1990. I now own house, but I'm letting Aunt live there. Aunt has 13-year-old dog that sleeps in backyard all day. One day Aunt sees psycho asshole shoot sleeping dog with pellet pistol. Calls cops. Neighbor claims dog was threatening. Cops take one look at dog and bust neighbor for animal cruelty. Psycho misses court date, winds up paying huge fine. Fast forward 5 years. I now live in grandmother's. Psycho comes over as I'm moving in, all fake smiley. Tell him flat out to stay the fuck away from me and mine. Tell him I don't want anything to do with cowardly assholes who swear at old ladies and shoot dogs. He totally loses his shit, screaming like the madman he was in front of half the neighbors. Occasionally hear him beating his wife and kids over next few years. Every month or so during spring and fall, he throws his grass clippings over the fence into a corner of my yard. For first 2 years, twice a year when he has family visit from out of town, he comes over, bangs on my door, and threatens me loudly about some non-existent issue to tough in front of relatives. Always has hand on gun in pocket. Each time I tell him, in a totally casual voice, to fuck off and wait for him to walk off, making non-specific threats. Year 3, I see he has family over. I know what's coming. I've had enough. I'm smart like dad, but meaner. Wait, psycho comes over and bags on door. Girlfriend opens door and I stick shotgun in his face. Freezes, turns whiter than white. Me, yelling as loud as I can, "What are you doing with that gun? Are you crazy? Don't shoot me." Slam door and immediately call cops. Tell cops psycho neighbor came over and threatened me with gun. Tell cops I'm terrified. 6 cop cars show up, surround neighbor's house and take him into custody. Cops believe me. They've looked up the guy's record and see the dog shooting and a previous arrest for escalating a speeding ticket into resisting arrest. And the neighbors tell the cops about his temper tantrum when I moved in. Relatives' kids tell cops they heard me yelling, "Don't shoot me," etc. Goes to jail until he can make bail and winds up pleading down to disorderly conduct or some such lesser offense. Quiet until he moves out in 2008, but still threw his grass clippings into my yard several times a year. Looked at me with sheer hatred every time I walked or drove by. I just smiled and waved. Please forgive my English. I am not a native speaker. I live in a small medieval town in central Italy and had this really weird and actually fun neighbor on the flat right above mine. The building has only 3 apartments. The third belongs to someone working abroad, so it is almost always empty. This guy is a semi-retired engineer, divorced and with a teenage daughter, who used to live mostly with her mother, but also spent the summers with her father. Let's start with her. I have a closet on the stairs where I keep tools and other stuff. It is around 1 square meter, 9 square feet. It has a door, but it is never locked. One morning, around 7 a.m., I was going to work and had to take something from the closet. I open the door and I freeze. There is something big and dark moving on the floor. It was the neighbor's daughter, hiding there to sleep and waiting to get back to her home. She lied to her father, telling him that she would have had a sleepover at a friend's house while she went clubbing, which she was not allowed to. The reason why she was not allowed was that her father, a few months ago, in the same club, was hitting on a much younger girl who was from a family of people no one would have messed with. He was told that no one of his family should have shown themselves in that club, or else. He was caught DUI several times and had his driving license suspended twice. He made a living from renting a home he owned in Miami, God knows why and when he bought it, and as a salesman for utility companies. He switched from one to another every few months, took most customers to the new provider, letting them leave a lot of unpaid bills with the previous one. Many of his customers, especially small businesses, did not pay a single bill in years. One night I came back home and found he left his keys in the outside door. While it is a very safe town, I think it is not a good idea to leave them there. So I take them and leave a message on the door telling him to call me at any hour. He could have just rang the bell, but he had my phone number anyway. The following morning, I open the kitchen door and find some of the flower vases in my backyard smashed and a chair right below his balcony. I am perplexed because I recognize the chair belongs to a wine bar close to my home. I call the neighbor and he asks me to come up and open his apartment's door. I find him limping, using a broom as an impromptu crutch. After a brief attempt to play down the situation, he admits that the night before he was back at 3 a.m. and could not call me because he was drunk like hell. So he took a chair the wine bar owner leaves outside at night, climbed over my backyard's wall, and tried to climb to his balcony. He failed twice, and the second one almost broke an ankle, in addition to smashing my flowers. I did not hear anything because my bedroom is on the other side of the building. He was finally able to get into his home, breaking a glass of a window, but could not open his home door from inside, trapped in his own house and with a serious injury to his ankle. I brought him to the local hospital, but did not wait until he was dismissed. Being well known among locals, he only managed to date immigrant women from East Europe. He had a couple of rocky relationships with two of them. After breaking up with the second one, he found a strange dolly, like a voodoo one, under his bed. So he called the local bishop to exorcise the home, though he never went to church and was probably an atheist. I once met him on the stairs and noticed he had a black eye. He confessed he had been hit by his daughter, the one hiding in my closet, during a fight. He moved to another city right before the COVID lockdown last year. I believe their new neighbors may tell other amazing stories. Creepy guy came into my apartment last night. The other day, I asked my boyfriend to run to the 7-Eleven and get our daughter a lunch, able for her field trip she was going on later that day. My boyfriend leaves for work every day around 5:15-ish a.m., but never later than 5:30. When returning from 7-Eleven, he comes in, hands me the bag, kisses me goodbye, and leaves for work. Because I asked him to run to the store last minute, he was running a bit late, was in a hurry, and forgot to lock the door. I sat in my room for about 5 more minutes after he left, then got up and was going to lay with my daughter for 30 to 45 minutes and scroll my phone until it was time to wake her up for school. As I walked from my room to hers, I glanced at the front door and noticed right then that it wasn't locked. But because I was awake and moving, I didn't think that much of it and proceeded to go lay with her. As I'm in bed, I hear something that could kind of sound like a door clicking open very softly, followed by light cabinet doors swinging shut super quietly. You definitely could have convinced yourself it was the neighbor pulling ingredients down from the cabinets, making breakfast or something. As I thought of these things, my 3-month-old kitty jumps down from being cuddled up in a good sleep and goes to the noise and starts to meow. But this meow wasn't like the meows at us when she wants food or something. It was one of the meows that sounds like they're in heat. She meows 4 times, then I hear a bag sound, and I think, that's weird. But she may be playing with the bag. Then I think to myself, maybe my boyfriend came to take out the trash, as I asked him to do hours and hours ago, which he didn't do before leaving. But at this point, he'd been gone for almost 20 minutes and past 5:30. So it was unrealistic that he would wait around in his truck for 20 minutes just to come up and take the trash out that he forgot to do earlier. So it took me a sec to come to these conclusions. But I hear nothing else, so I call out my boyfriend's name. I get to response, so I call my cat back. As she is walking toward me, I hear the bag sound again, and seconds later a latching sound. About 20 minutes later, I get my daughter up and ready for school and walk from her room to mine. I look at my front door, and my door is open. No open, like you can just walk through it, but it's resting on the frame of the door, almost shut, but you can still tell it's open, and my trash is gone. We just had a little get-together, so that trash bag accumulated a decent amount of trash, but I shut the door, locked it. But I take her to school shortly after. This all happens between 5 to 7 a.m. He leaves at 5:30 this day. I leave to take her to school by 6:45 a.m. that same morning. And all this happened after he left for work. But before I left for school, I call my BF and ask him if he took out the trash, and he says no. I think he's playing a joke on me, so I ask again, and he's still saying no. So I ask security a few days later to rewind the tapes to see what happened to my trash. Kind of weird question to ponder, like, I wonder where my trash walked off to? Lol, odd. Anyways, my boyfriend thought I was crazy and joked it off like I forgot I was the one to take it out or something crazy. But it wasn't me. But when security finally told him that someone in fact was in our house and that he came from his house, we were shook. A little bit of backstory here, but across the hall and down right one more door is the really creepy older guy that barely ever has his door closed. It's always open, but not the open you can walk through. But the door is resting on the frame, creating a little crack in the door where you can see out of. And I've actually caught him a few times looking out of the little crack in the door into the hallway as people are walking down it. Many times I've asked myself how long he's been standing there doing that, whether there's people in the hallway or not. Another time I was going to leave with my daughter to Chuck E. Cheese. She was super stoked and ran into the hallway without us. As I was grabbing my keys off the table, my boyfriend went to follow her so she wasn't alone, and was seconds after her opened the door and she was walking back towards our house. But her whole demeanor shifted. She was nervous, like scared, weird, weary of her surroundings. And my boyfriend noticed the creep neighbor guy was standing outside of his door, leaned up on the wall, looking eye down the hallway, and had been for a long time before that, because my mom said she seen him in the same spot too about an hour before that. Well, turns out it was the creepy guy who came into my apartment when my boyfriend left that morning, and the video showed him waiting for him to leave. He knew my boyfriend didn't lock it, and as my boyfriend got onto the elevator and faced our door, down the long-ass hallway when the doors shut, he came from his app to my door and stood in my house for a few minutes and took off with my trash back into his house. I think when I called out my boyfriend's name, it spooked him, because he thought my daughter and I was asleep, and the cat probably blew his quiet cover. So he took off with the trash and booked. What did he want? Was he listening that whole time? How do you know he didn't lock the door? And what'd he do with my trash? I'm like super worried about asleep in separate rooms of my daughter now. Whether the door is locked or not, she sleeps in our bed. I would like some advice on what exactly I'm able to do. What are some of my tenant rights? Will calling the law make this worse by provoking his strange behavior if it deemed his intentions with unsuccessful? I can't see any good reason why he would need in my app, so I don't think his intentions were to be anything good. That's it for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe.